Hi everybody. So I'm going to do 3 short videos here. Make sure you watch them in order. At the end of each video there's going to be a problem for you to do, or maybe a couple of problems for you to do. I want you to turn off the video, go do that problem or two, even if you don't write down the answer, even if you just read the problem and think, well, I think this is the answer. That would be okay, because this is just going to be check for understanding. And then you go on to the next video, and at the beginning of the next video then I will explain the answers to the questions. All right, so we're talking today about designing studies and specifically samples and surveys. And I think that when you hear survey, you think of those, you know, maybe online questionnaires that you fill out, or maybe a paper questionnaire that you fill out, which indeed we call a survey. But surveys are really collecting data, okay, particularly from a sample. And so that collection is called surveying, okay? And we're going to specifically be talking about identifying what would be a population and then a sample. And take note right away, you're hearing words that sound familiar, that you've heard of in everyday language, but they're going to have a little bit different meaning in statistics. Okay, we'll talk about good samples and bad samples. We'll talk about ways to determine a sample, and we will talk about advantages and disadvantages of different kinds of methods. We will not get to the very last bullet point on this screen. That will be part of some work we do next week. Okay, so first, population, census, and sample. A population is a collection of every individual you want to learn about. Now, you hear individual and most of us think immediately of people, individual people, but it's not necessarily people that you're studying or gathering data about. So I'm just going to use the notion of batteries. Let's say I've decided, because we use a lot of batteries in the math department for our graphing calculators, so I've decided to do a study on AAA batteries. And I'm going to try to figure out, you know, how long do AAA batteries last and which kind lasts the longest. So therefore, all the AAA batteries in the world would really be my population. I want to know from all the different kinds of batteries which ones last the longest. All right, now it wouldn't be practical for me to test every single AAA battery in the world, so therefore I would not want to take a census, because a census collects data from every single individual. It would also be a really bad idea to do that, because probably the only way I'm going to determine how long a given AAA battery lasts is by draining it, and so then I'd end up with, there wouldn't be any batteries left. So instead, I would want to take a sample. A sample is a subset of all the individuals in the population. So for me, a sample would be many different kinds of AAA batteries. Now it's important that the sample, every individual in the sample, is also a member of the population. So for example, let's say I decided I wanted to sample Energizer batteries. And I went to buy Energizer batteries, and doggone it, the store was out of AAAs. So instead, I bought AA batteries. Well, that wouldn't work, because AA batteries are not part of my population. Every member of the sample has to also be a member of the population. So the idea is you have this population of things you want to gather information about. From that, you take a sample, you collect data about the sample. From the sample, you make an inference about the population. You say, hey, if this is true of the sample, it must be true of the population. Okay, so that's the idea of it. We draw conclusions about a whole population on the basis of a sample. It's not always easy to determine what your sample should be. So in choosing a sample, the first thing you have to do is define your population. You have to know exactly who and what it is you want to do your study about. So in my case, it was AAA batteries, and I'm just going to, you know, every AAA battery there is my population, but maybe that's not practical. Maybe I can't really put my hands on every single kind of AAA battery in the world. Maybe there's some kind of batteries that they use in other countries that we don't even have here. So maybe I better define my population a little bit better. Maybe my population should be all brands of AAA batteries available in the United States, or even all brands of AAA batteries available in Green Valley and Blue Springs, Missouri, or something like that. Then I have to say exactly what it is I want to measure. So exactly what I wanted to measure was, how long do the AAA batteries last? Well, I'm talking about a length of time. That's a little tricky. Doesn't it depend on how much they're used? So maybe I would need to get more specific on that. Maybe I'd have to say, I want to know if I put these AAA batteries in my calculators in my classroom at the beginning of the year, and which kind will last long. Maybe I put one brand in each battery, or in each calculator, and I want to wait and see which kind will last the longest. Of course, I'm assuming that every battery gets, or every calculator gets used the same amount. So see, it gets trickier than you think. And then I'd have to decide, how am I going to choose a sample from the population? I have 30 calculators in my classroom. I don't know. Maybe there's more than 30 kinds of AAA batteries out there. I've never really checked. So we could do a bad job of doing a sample. A bad job of getting a sample would be getting a convenience sample. So a convenience sample would be if I just drove over to Casey's and said, do you have any AAA batteries? And they say, oh yeah, there's some on the wall back there. And I go back and maybe they only have one kind or two kinds. And I'm like, well, there's my sample. I've got two kinds. That would be a poor sample, because who knows how many batteries Casey's sells. They might not sell very many batteries there. And only two different brands, that's not a very good sample from all the different kinds of batteries that there are. Another thing, it shows bias. Bias happens if that sample would either underestimate or overestimate the value of what I want to know. So maybe Casey sells a huge number of batteries, in which case those batteries, they put out new batteries every day, and they get shipments of batteries like once a week, so they're always like really fresh batteries. Or maybe Casey's doesn't hardly ever sell batteries, in which case the batteries they have there are really old, and so I'd get a really poor result. So that wouldn't be a good idea. Another bad way to get a sample, and this is generally, it has to be when the individuals are people. It's when there's a voluntary response sample. That's when people volunteer to answer the survey or the question or whatever it is. This would be, a perfect example would be like America's Got Talent, where some people watch the show and then call in and vote. Well, they volunteer to call in and vote. And certainly many people watch the show and never vote. Some people watch the show one time in the season, but that one time that they call in, they vote. And so, they get a voice in there. So voluntary response sample is a poor sample of a population. It is not representative of the population. Imagine, and I'm sure it's true, that there are many, many people that never ever watch America's Got Talent. And I'm sure that there are people that know a lot about those talents, but never even see the performers. And so those people might watch and say, oh, they're saying they're really good. Well, I know about that skill, and in fact, they're not that good at all. Okay, so far we've covered this much, and what I'd like you to do is turn to your book to page 228 and read and think about problems number 2 and 7. You might want to jot down the answers just so you remember what you were thinking, and then start the next video.